Welcome back. We have been discussing about the role of experience in understanding consciousness vis-a-vis Robomary of Dennett. We continue this discussion further. Dennett argues that if Mary's physical knowledge were truly complete, she wouldn't need the experience of seeing red to understand it. Her experience of redness would simply be the confirmation of her knowledge rather than the acquisition of something new. Experience, in Dennett's view, can be fully explained by physical processes and simulations. So, Robomary could know what it is like to see red without ever experiencing it. We have also seen that physicalism, though it has its both positive and negative, there are points of debate between the two, and Frank Jackson and Daniel Dennett in their own way have picked them up. The point of convergence. In both the scenarios, they explore the scope of physicalism's ability to explain consciousness but arrive at opposite conclusions. Divergence. Jackson argues that physicalism leaves something out, qualia, while Dennett maintains that physicalism, when understood properly, can account for everything, including consciousness and subjective experience. So, we have been discussing about the convergence and divergence, and there are few more important points of convergence which needs our attention. Both agree on the importance of consciousness and the challenge of explaining it. The thought experiments are built around the puzzle of understanding consciousness, especially the subjective aspects. Both acknowledge the distinction between physical and experiential knowledge. They both recognize that there is a difference between knowing the science behind something and experiencing it firsthand, though they disagree on the implications of this difference. Jackson's argument depends on qualia being something non-physical and irreducible, while Dennett argues that qualia don't represent anything beyond the physical processes in the brain. 2. The completeness of physical knowledge. Jackson's thought experiment aims to show that physical knowledge is incomplete when it comes to explaining consciousness, while Dennett argues that if physicalism is fully understood, it can explain all aspects of experience. Jackson emphasized the importance of first-hand experience for understanding qualia, while Dennett suggests that imagination or simulation can replicate that experience. In a sense, the debate reflects a broader discussion in philosophy of mind whether consciousness and subjective experience can be fully understood through physical processes or whether they point to something beyond the physical. So, we will now quickly summarize our points of Robomary and Mary's argument, and we see what has happened beyond this debate. Beyond the Mary argument and Robomary, the philosophical insights delve into broader issues of consciousness, the limits of physicalism, the nature of subjective experience, and the role of knowledge in understanding the mind. Here are some critical themes and insights that extend beyond the initial thought experiments. The Mary argument, as we have discussed already, thus challenges physicalism, suggesting that complete physical description of the world, including scientific knowledge, is insufficient to account for subjective experience of qualia. The idea is that even with all the physical facts, something about conscious experience remains unexplained. In contrast, Robomary, Dennett's response, attempts to preserve physicalism by arguing that complete physical knowledge could allow one to understand subjective experiences, thus closing the supposed gap. Epistemic gap versus ontological gap. The debate goes beyond whether Mary learned something new, epistemic knowledge, when she experiences red, to whether she suggests there is an ontological gap, meaning that there are aspects of reality like qualia that are fundamentally non-physical. Epistemic gap. Mary does not have all the knowledge needed to predict the experience. Ontological gap. Qualia themselves are non-physical entities, irreducible to physical facts. Philosophical questions beyond the Mary argument could possibly be some of the research questions. A. Does an epistemic gap necessarily imply an ontological gap? Epistemic gap is a gap in what we know, and an ontological gap is a gap in what there is. Second question could be, if qualia are real, what kind of entities are they? Are they non-physical or simply misunderstood physical properties? There's this last aspect of qualia which we all should be acquainted with, and that is whether qualia is mystical or is it reducible. So we know by now that the concept of qualia is central to both arguments. Jackson's Murray experiment suggests that qualia, like the experience of redness, are fundamentally different from physical descriptions. Dennett's Robomary attempts to debunk this notion, arguing that once we fully understand the physical processes, there is no extra what it feels like left to explain. The mystical qualia. Some philosophers like David Chalmers, with the hard problem of consciousness, argue that qualia are irreducible and fundamentally non-physical. The what it is like aspect of consciousness cannot be explained by physical facts alone. Eliminative or reductive qualia. Dennett's view suggests that qualia are not some extra property beyond physicalism, but can be explained through functional or neurobiological processes. He sees qualia as emergent properties reducible to the interactions between the brain's processes. So beyond the debate, again, questions like, are qualia an intrinsic part of the physical world, just misunderstood, or can qualia be eliminated, as Dennett suggests, with the focus shifting to understanding cognitive processes without invoking mystical subjective experiences, and the rest could be taken up. So we have been discussing the debate between the Robomarys and Daniel Dennett, and we have seen that both of them have their own share of arguments. In order that philosophy of mind continues to be expanding and discussions continue, we stop not at the answers but with questions. So the other continued possible questions that an interested mind can pick up following our discussions are: can a person truly imagine an experience without having had it? Does direct experience provide a kind of knowledge that is fundamentally different from descriptive knowledge? For we have been discussing about Mary and Robomary, and we have seen that both of them either talks about emergentism or dualism. Someone could be a strong emergence, someone could be a weak emergence. But again, we are focused mostly on questions. So the other questions could be like, is consciousness a weak or strong emergent property? Can consciousness be reduced to physical processes, or does it involve some fundamentally different kind of experience? And we know that the hard problem of consciousness of David Chalmers rotates around consciousness of this part of qualia being mysterious, and Daniel Dennett precisely critiquing this hard problem of consciousness via his Robomary. We have thus seen and discussed about the easy problem of consciousness. We have also talked about the hard problem of consciousness. So some of the further research questions beyond this debate could be, is the hard problem of consciousness real or an artifact of our misunderstanding of brain processes? Can subjective experiences be fully explained by cognitive and physical sciences? We have also seen the nature of perception and representation. We have also talked about the philosophical insights. Thus, the continued series of questions for any interested researcher in philosophy of mind could be, is perception simply a matter of neural representation, or does it involve some extra dimension of experience? Can the mind's way of representing the world fully account for conscious experience, or does this leave something unexplained? Thus, Daniel Dennett, as we understand by now, is a staunch physicalist, famously critiqued Jackson's what Mary did not know argument, rejecting the conclusion that Mary gains non-physical knowledge when she experiences color. Dennett believes that the thought experiment, which claims to show that qualia cannot be reduced to physical facts, is misleading and based on a false intuition. So we have been discussing about Dennett's rejections of Jackson's argument. We have also seen how Dennett has been successful in converting Frank Jackson to a physicalist himself. Thus, Dennett's Robo-Mary thought experiment is one of the most significant experiments in philosophy of mind, for we see the transition of a phenomenalist thinker to being converted to an intentionalist, physicalist thinker. Thus, Dennett had happily introduced Robo-Mary, and this is why I am emphasizing once again the importance of Robo-Mary. The thought experiment in gist is a robotic version of Mary designed to make the thought experiment more precise and emphasize the limitations of Jackson's reasoning. Thus, to conclude, Robo-Mary is hypothetical robo who has been programmed with complete physical knowledge about the human visual system and color vision. She can simulate the experience of seeing red using her computational powers and predict exactly what it would be like to have that experience based on her complete understanding of physics, neurobiology, and psychology involved. Dennett argues that Robo-Mary can run a simulation of color perception that is functionally equivalent to the actual experience of seeing red. Therefore, Robo-Mary does not need to physically see red to gain additional knowledge. Robo-Mary's simulation allows her to predict the experience in the same way that a fully knowledgeable human Mary should be able to. The key point Dennett makes with Robo-Mary is that once you know all the physical facts, there is no room for surprise. Robo-Mary's simulation illustrates that experiences can be fully understood in terms of physical processes without the need to any mysterious non-physical properties such as qualia. Dennett claims that Jackson's Mary argument wrongly assumes the experience of seeing red would somehow be unpredictable or indescribable from physical knowledge alone. By using Robo-Mary, Dennett shows that even a robo with complete physical knowledge could generate a perfect simulation of an experience, undermining the claim that subjective experience is outside the scope of physicalism. While Jackson's Mary is portrayed as learning something new when she experiences red, Robo-Mary suggests that a being with full physical knowledge could predict subjective experiences without needing to physically undergo them. This directly challenges the intuition that Jackson originally thought experiment relied on. Dennett's Robo-Mary emphasizes the predictive power of physicalism, asserting that the first-person experience of seeing red is simply a different perspective on the same underlying physical facts that Robo-Mary already knows in full detail. Thus, Robo-Mary's experience is fully explainable in terms of the third-person physical knowledge. So, Dennett's work on physicalism, particularly in relation to what Mary didn't know, thought experiment of Jackson, has been central to his critique of non-materialistic views of consciousness. In Jackson's scenario, Mary is a scientist who knows everything physical about color but has never experienced it. When she finally sees color, she learns something new, and that precisely was problematic for Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett rejects this argument and maintains that if Mary truly knew everything about color, she wouldn't learn anything new upon seeing color for the first time. He argues that Jackson's thought experiment is misleading because it assumes that knowing can exclude the ability to imagine or simulate the experience itself. Dennett challenges this by the Robo-Mary capable of processing all physical data about color, suggesting that experiencing color is just a physical brain processes and not something beyond the physical realm. In this broader work, Dennett remains a staunch physicalist, contending that consciousness and subjective experiences can be fully explained in physical terms. He criticizes the notion of qualia as ineffable, private experiences that are inaccessible to science, arguing instead that they are simply misunderstandings of how the brain processes sensory information. So his famous work like Consciousness Explained continue to build on this view. Recent critics of Daniel Dennett, such as those by John M. Depoe, argue that Dennett's physicalism does not adequately address certain empirical findings, such as in case of blind sight or tactile vision substitution, where people respond to stimuli they cannot consciously perceive. Critics argue that such phenomena suggest that there might be non-physical aspects of consciousness that Dennett's framework struggles to explain. In terms of his latest contribution, Dennett continues to explore the intersection of language, culture, and consciousness, proposing that human consciousness is deeply tied to evolutionary and cultural processes rather than non-physical substances. Dennett's critique extends beyond Jackson's experiment into broader anti-physicalist arguments, and if we note that the criticism of Dennett's argument and other anti-physicalist positions rely on outdated or incomplete understanding of science's potential to explain consciousness. He believes that neuroscience and cognitive science will eventually explain how subjective experience qualia arise from brain processes, closing the so-called epistemic gap. Then it suggests that the division between objective third-person science and subjective first-person experience is an illusion. He proposes that once all the relevant physical information is understood, the supposed mystery of consciousness will dissolve. Dennett suggests that the division between objective third-person science and subjective first-person experience is illusion. His work, Illusion of Qualia, famously argues that qualia don't actually exist. So in summary, Dennett's Robo-Mary undermines Jackson's Mary by showing that if physicalism is true, then there is no need for non-physical explanations for subjective experience. Robo-Mary, who knows everything about the physical processes of color vision, would be able to predict the experience of seeing red without ever having seen it herself. Dennett's broader argument is that physical knowledge is sufficient to account for consciousness and that subjective experiences like qualia are simply ways of accessing physical facts from a first-person perspective, not evidence of non-physical entities. Thus, in Dennett's view, the scenario where someone can recognize a person's behavior without being able to identify their face relates to how he approaches the concept of qualia and subjective experiences in general. Dennett's broader argument is that subjective experiences are not mysterious, non-physical entities, but rather are fully explainable by physical processes in the brain. Dennett rejects the notion that qualia, the raw subjective experience of what it is like, are fundamentally different from physical knowledge. He argues that what we call qualia are just ways of talking about complex brain processes, and there is nothing inherently non-physical about them. In the case of face recognition, the brain processes visual information in a very complex way. If one fails to recognize the face but still knows how a person behaves, this might point to a deficit in visual processing but not in the knowledge of the person's behavior. From Dennett's perspective, this example shows that recognition is simply another form of physical knowledge arising from neural processes. It does not provide the existence of qualia as something extra-physical or separate from the brain's information processing abilities about them. Thus, when Frank Jackson's Mary recognized the red for the first time, Dennett argues that the recognition is simply another form of physical knowledge arising from neural processes, and she is only confirming to what she has learned. There is nothing new about it. Dennett thus argues that thinking of qualia as something distinct from physical processes is a misleading intuition. In a sense, face recognition and behavioral understanding are different functions of brain processes. If one processes, that is recognizing a face, in this case Jackson's Mary recognizing the red tomato as red, is impaired, but another, understanding behavior, remains intact, this does not point to the existence of a mysterious qualia. It only highlights that the brain handles these tasks using distinct neural pathways, all of which are physical and accessible through science. For Dennett, the failure to recognize a face but knowing how the person behaved exemplifies how subjective experience can be broken down into physical processes. This serves to support his argument that qualia are not special, ineffable aspects of consciousness, but rather illusions of a deeper mystery that can be fully explained through physical mechanisms in the brain. So, we have noticed how these discussions have happened. We have also seen how contemporary thinkers like David Chalmers and others have chipped in to contribute to these findings. Chalmers, as we understand, is one of the most prominent philosophers on consciousness, famous for formulating the hard problem of consciousness. He argues that physical explanations like those Dennett defends are insufficient to explain qualia, which he sees as irreducible. While Jackson's thought experiment focuses on knowledge acquisition, Chalmers extends the debate to the metaphysical problem of explaining why and how physical processes give rise to subjective experience. So, in his work, Chalmers posits that phenomenal consciousness resists reduction to purely physical explanations, making his approach an important counterpart to Dennett's eliminative materialism. We also have Susan Hurley. Hurley's work on embodied cognition argues against the idea that cognition and consciousness can be understood in isolation from bodily interactions with the world. This perspective diverges from both Jackson's and Dennett's approaches by emphasizing the role of the environment and body in generating conscious experience, not merely abstract brain states or knowledge of facts. We also have Thomas Metzinger. Metzinger, known for his work on the self-model theory of subjectivity, suggests that consciousness is an internal model constructed by the brain that serves to represent the body and the world. In this view, the subjective experience of color that Mary might gain upon leaving the room is part of this model and may still be explainable in physicalist terms, though in a more complex and layered model than traditional reductionism allows. Frank Jackson's shift. So interestingly, Jackson himself later revised his stance, moving away from dualism and towards physicalism, arguing that his original thought experiments misrepresented the nature of knowledge. There have been many more debates from John Searle to others, and we have seen and discussed all of it today vis-a-vis Qualia, Epiphenomenal Qualia, Jackson's What Mary Did Not Know, to the counter-argument of Dennett's Robo Mary. Thank you so much.